You think you understand what it means to be human. You think civilization started in cities, with laws, with technology. But deep in the Amazon rainforest, there are people who never stopped practicing rituals older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than anything you were taught in school. They speak to plants, they shapeshift into jaguars. They die and come back. And scientists? They can't explain it. What if everything we call progress made us forget who we really are? This is the story of the Amazonian tribes, not the ones you see in textbooks or nature documentaries, not the noble savages frozen in time for your entertainment. This is about rituals so powerful, so misunderstood, that governments have tried to ban them. Missionaries have called them demonic. Anthropologists have risked their lives just to witness them. And yet, they're still happening. Right now, today. So here's what we're going to uncover. What are these rituals really about? Why have they survived for thousands of years when empires have crumbled? And is it possible that these tribes know something about reality that we've completely lost? Because once you see what they do, and why they do it, you might never look at your own life the same way again. His name was Richard Evans Schultes. Most people have never heard of him. But among those who study the Amazon, he's a legend. In 1941, this Harvard botanist walked into the rainforest with a backpack and a notebook. He didn't come back for 12 years. Schultes lived with over a dozen tribes. He ate what they ate, he drank what they drank, and he participated in rituals that would make most people lose their minds. Literally. He watched shamans heal the dying with nothing but songs and smoke. He saw warriors enter trances so deep they couldn't feel pain. He drank ayahuasca, a brew so potent it was said to let you see through time itself. And when he finally returned to civilization, he brought back over 24,000 plant specimens. Many had never been classified by science. But here's the thing. Schultes never wrote about the real rituals, not in his academic papers, not in his books. He said some things were too sacred to share with outsiders. What did he see that he couldn't or wouldn't tell the world? Let's start with what we do know. Across the Amazon basin, from Brazil to Peru, Colombia to Ecuador, hundreds of indigenous tribes still practice rituals passed down for generations. Not as a tourist attraction, not as folklore, as survival. These rituals aren't random. They're precise, methodical, almost scientific in their structure. They include ayahuasca ceremonies, where shamans guide participants into visions using a psychoactive brew made from 2 specific plants that, on their own, do nothing. Together, they unlock parts of the brain science is only beginning to understand. There are the bullet ant gloves. The Sateré-Mawé tribe forces young men to wear gloves filled with bullet ants, insects with the most painful sting on Earth. The goal? To endure it without screaming. To prove you can handle anything life throws at you. Tobacco shamanism, where shamans drink pure liquid tobacco until they vomit, entering a trance state they say lets them communicate with the spirit world. And shape-shifting rituals. Yes, you heard that right. Tribes like the Shuar believe their shamans can turn into jaguars. Not symbolically, literally. Now you might be thinking, that's just mythology, superstition, primitive belief. But then explain this. Western scientists who studied ayahuasca users found that people from completely different tribes who had never met, never spoken, described the exact same visions. Serpents made of light, geometric patterns, beings they called plant teachers. How is that possible? Evidence 1. The neuroscience. In 2012, a team of British researchers scanned the brains of people under the influence of ayahuasca. What they found shocked them. The brew didn't just activate the brain, it synchronized regions that normally don't communicate. The visual cortex lit up like a fireworks display, even with eyes closed. One participant described seeing the blueprint of life itself. Another said, "I understood my ancestors. I felt them inside me." This wasn't hallucination, it was hyperconnection. Evidence 2. The artwork. Deep in caves across the Amazon, there are paintings, thousands of years old, and they look exactly like the visions people described during ayahuasca ceremonies: spirals, jaguars with human eyes, serpents coiled around trees. Did ancient people paint what they saw in the same trance state? Evidence 3. The jaguar phenomenon. Anthropologists noticed something strange. Shamans who claimed to become jaguars during rituals began to move differently. Their pupils dilated, their breathing slowed, their reflexes sharpened. One researcher wrote, "I watched a man in his 60s leap over a fallen log in total darkness without hesitation, no stumble, no fear, as if he could see in the dark." Jaguars are nocturnal hunters with night vision 6 times stronger than humans. Was this performance or something else? Evidence 4. The tsantsa. The Shuar and Akuar tribes used to shrink the heads of their enemies, not as trophies, as spiritual protection. They believed the soul of a defeated warrior could come back for revenge, so they trapped it, shrunk the head, sealed the lips, performed rituals to bind the spirit forever. Museums have hundreds of these heads. And here's the eerie part. Some were tested for age. They're real. Human skin, human hair, shrunk down to the size of a fist using techniques science still can't fully replicate. Evidence 5. Tobacco trance healing. In 2008, a documentary crew filmed a tobacco shaman treating a man with a venomous snake bite. No antivenom, no hospital. The shaman drank tobacco water until he vomited. He blew smoke over the wound. He sang for 6 hours straight. The man survived. Doctors later said the venom should have killed him in under 2 hours. The shaman's explanation? "I spoke to the snake's spirit. I asked it to leave." Of course, not everyone believes this. Dr. Angela Morrison, a neuropsychologist at Stanford, reviewed the ayahuasca studies and said, "What people call visions are predictable responses to DMT, a naturally occurring hallucinogen. The brain is tricked. It's not accessing another dimension. It's misfiring." Fair point. And the bullet ant ritual. Anthropologists argue it's just a rite of passage. Pain endurance. Nothing mystical about it. The shrunken heads? Gruesome, yes, but explainable with heat, sand, and basic preservation techniques. Even the jaguar transformations could be explained as adrenaline, suggestion, and cultural performance. So maybe it's all explainable. Maybe there's no mystery here. Maybe these are just people doing what humans have always done, creating meaning through ritual. But then, why does it work? Here's what the scientists can't explain. In 2016, researchers wanted to test whether shamans actually had knowledge modern medicine didn't. They went to the Matsés tribe in Peru. The Matsés use a secretion from the giant monkey frog. They burn their skin, apply the toxin, and within seconds, they vomit violently. Their heart rate spikes. They feel like they're dying. But afterward, they say their senses sharpen, their minds clear. They can hunt for days without fatigue. Western researchers took samples back to the lab. Turns out the frog secretion contains peptides that cross the blood-brain barrier, something pharmaceutical companies have been trying to synthesize for decades. The Matsés had been using it for centuries. And it's not just one tribe. Over 80% of modern pharmaceuticals are derived from plant compounds. And guess who discovered most of them first? Indigenous shamans. How did they know? Trial and error? Luck? Or did they learn it another way? In 1999, anthropologist Jeremy Narby published a book called The Cosmic Serpent. In it, he proposed something wild. What if the visions aren't hallucinations? What if ayahuasca lets shamans communicate directly with plant DNA? Sounds insane, right? But here's what he found. Shamans across the Amazon, people who never met, never shared notes, never had contact with each other, all described the same thing during their visions. A serpent, twisted, double helix shaped, glowing, alive. Wait, Double helix? That's the shape of DNA. And here's where it gets stranger. Narby interviewed shamans who said the plants themselves taught them which combinations to use. They didn't experiment randomly. They were shown, guided, instructed by something they couldn't see in waking life. One shaman told him, "The plant spirits are alive. They have knowledge. If you listen, they'll teach you." Western science calls this impossible. But then how do you explain the fact that out of 80,000 plant species in the Amazon, shamans somehow knew to combine two specific plants, the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna leaf, to create a brew that unlocks DMT in the brain? On their own, neither works. You need both, in exact proportions. The odds of discovering that by accident? Astronomically low. So either they got incredibly lucky, or someone, or something, showed them. And here's the thing. This isn't just an Amazon phenomenon. Across the world, ancient cultures spoke of plant gods and sacred brews that let priests and shamans communicate with the divine. The Egyptians had the blue lotus, a psychoactive flower used in religious ceremonies. The Greeks had the Eleusinian mysteries, a secret ritual involving a drink called kykeon that caused visions so profound participants were forbidden from speaking about them under penalty of death. The Vedic texts of India mention soma, a mysterious plant that granted enlightenment and immortality. The Aztecs used psilocybin mushrooms, calling them flesh of the gods. Different continents, different plants, same experience. Visions of serpents, communication with ancestors, journeys to the underworld and back. Carl Jung called these archetypes universal symbols buried in the human psyche. But the shamans? They say it's not symbols. It's memory. Memory of a time when humans still knew how to listen. When the line between the physical and spiritual world wasn't a wall, it was a doorway. And the rituals? They're the key. But something happened. Somewhere along the way, we forgot. When Europeans arrived in the Americas in the 1500s, they didn't see sacred knowledge. They saw savagery. Missionaries burned the codices. Conquistadors destroyed the temples. Entire tribes were wiped out. Not just their people, but their languages, their songs, their rituals. The Inquisition labeled ayahuasca the devil's vine. Shamans were tortured, executed, their knowledge dismissed as witchcraft. By the 1900s, many tribes had been forced into Christianity, forced to abandon their ways, forced to forget. And for a while, it seemed like the rituals would die completely. But they didn't, because deep in the jungle, away from the missions and the cities and the laws, the shamans kept practicing, in secret, passing the knowledge to their children, keeping the fire alive. And now, in the 21st century, something unexpected is happening. People from the modern world, burned out, medicated, disconnected, are going back to the Amazon. They're sitting in ceremony, drinking ayahuasca, facing their trauma, healing in ways therapy and pills never could. And the shamans, they say the plants called them. Of course, modern science has a lot to say about all this. Neuroscientists argue that ayahuasca simply disrupts normal brain function. The visions are the brain trying to make sense of chaos. The healing is placebo effect mixed with emotional catharsis. Anthropologists say the rituals are cultural constructs, meaningful to the people who practice them, but not objectively real. Botanists point out that indigenous knowledge, while impressive, can be explained through observation and experimentation over generations. No magic required. And they're not wrong. There's no peer-reviewed proof that shamans can talk to plants. No double-blind study showing that jaguar transformation is literal. No hard evidence that ayahuasca opens a portal to another dimension. But here's the question no one can answer. If all of this is just superstition, why does it work? Why do people report life-changing experiences? Why do addicts break free from decades of dependency after one ceremony? Why do cancer patients describe profound peace in their final days after drinking the brew? Why are there now clinical trials at Johns Hopkins, Yale, and Imperial College London studying these same substances? Because something is happening, something we don't fully understand yet. And maybe, just maybe, the tribes have been right all along. Let's step back for a second. Maybe the shamans aren't literally turning into jaguars. Maybe they're entering a flow state so deep that they embody the essence of the animal, its instincts, its focus, its power. Maybe the plant teachers aren't sentient beings whispering secrets. Maybe the human brain, under the influence of DMT, accesses stored evolutionary information, patterns recognized by our ancestors and encoded in our DNA. Maybe the rituals aren't magic. Maybe they're psychology, advanced intuitive psychology refined over thousands of years. The bullet ant glove isn't about mysticism. It's about confronting pain, learning resilience, proving to yourself that you're stronger than you think. The ayahuasca ceremony isn't about spirits. It's about breaking down the ego, facing your shadows, integrating your trauma. The tobacco purge isn't about talking to snakes. It's about inducing a state of shock that forces the body into overdrive, activating healing mechanisms we barely understand. These interpretations are more palatable, more scientific. But here's the thing. The tribes don't care how you explain it. To them, it's not a debate, it's life. So let me ask you this. What if your DNA carries echoes of these rituals? What if somewhere, buried deep in your ancestry, your people did this too? Because they did. Before cities, before screens, before we disconnected from the earth and started living in our heads, humans everywhere practiced ceremony, ritual, connection. We danced around fires. We sang to the moon. We fasted. We purged. We sat in silence and listened to something bigger than ourselves, and then we stopped. We traded it for progress, for comfort, for control. But the tribes in the Amazon, they never stopped. And now, as our world spins faster, as depression skyrockets, as people feel more isolated than ever despite being more connected, maybe we're starting to remember why the rituals mattered. Not because they're exotic, not because they're trendy, but because they work. They reconnect you to yourself, to others, to the earth, to something sacred. And you don't have to drink ayahuasca or wear bullet ant gloves to access that. You just have to be willing to ask the question, what did we lose when we stopped honoring the mystery? The Amazonian tribes are disappearing. Every year, languages go extinct. Elders die without passing on their knowledge. The jungle burns, the modern world creeps closer. But the rituals, they're still alive, still practiced, still powerful, still transforming lives. And the question isn't whether shamans can really talk to plants or turn into jaguars. The question is, what would change in your life if you believed the world was more than what you can see? What would you do differently if you knew there was something sacred still worth protecting? The tribes aren't asking you to join them. They're asking you to wake up. So here's my question for you. Do you think these rituals are ancient superstition or ancient wisdom we desperately need right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. Because this conversation, it's just beginning.